come from a country that for 50 years was under a strong and brutal socialistic regime, the Soviet Union, where communication manipulation, propaganda, and political suppression were used as tools to control and surveil the people of Lithuania and 14 other countries. My parents used to tell me stories of how deeply manipulation and propaganda were rooted in the Soviet television, radio, and press. The evening news on television used to show homelessness and violence on the American streets, yet praise and preach how the communist government was maintaining peace and people lived better than ever. Meanwhile, the editors of newspaper main job was to censor and wipe out anything that went against the political propaganda. The manipulation of communication went as far as the Soviet government hiding the Chernobyl's nuclear explosion from the world and the people of Ukraine. Ultimately, with each generation born into the lies of communism, people find it harder to tell the truth from the lie. Yet, as my parents explained, the contrast between what was shown on TV and what was the daily reality of an entire nation began to provoke thoughts in their heads that they are being conditioned and manipulated. Fast forward to 1996, I was born into the age of independence, digitalization, and the internet. I was around 10 years old when I got access to the web. It shaped me as I watched it revolutionize our society from the way we work to the way we play. The manipulation of information that the people of the Soviet Union were under now seems so far away because the internet holds unlimited opportunities to be and see what you want to see, right? Yet, with the rise of social media, I began to notice how these apps and web pages that made the world more connected and aware than ever infiltrate our privacy, force us to buy and consume, surround us with information that feels so real and reliable. You'd be surprised how many times you and I have fallen for an orchestrated public relations campaign without even knowing. So I began to question, is the manipulation really gone, or did we just develop a false sense of security and trust online? Let me take you back to the beginning. Since the ancient times, power relationships have been based on who has control over communication. Most of the history of humanity, governments and corporations held this power in their hands. However, in 1990s, a new technology of freedom and libertarian culture, the internet, opened a whole new narrative in our society. We, as users, co-created and modified it rather than just adapted to it. Between 2004 and 2010, social media websites such as Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook were created. These networks of communication have created a landscape of social and political change by shifting the power from governments and corporations to us users choosing the term of social media co-evolution. I find it amazing how they sell us free expression, unlimited content, and chosen sociability for free. We are surrounded with bubbles of what we want and like to see, the people we find interesting, and opinions we agree with, all done by algorithms who collect the biggest prize of it all, our data. What we like, who we are, what we do, and what will we do. So what happens when these digital bubbles crash into global politics? Now, you have most likely heard about the social media app called TikTok. If you haven't, it's a platform for short videos, varying from genres such as entertainment to education, that has over 500 million active users. Yet, in 2020, USA government vowed to ban TikTok from the American market due to the algorithm that runs the social media app, which gains the developer access to tackle you with different markets all over the world. But the problem doesn't stop there. It is rooted in the fact that the app itself comes from China, a government that constantly surveils people and their data, uses censorship, and breaks human rights. So I began to map out, how do algorithms and the content we are presented with in social media influence politics? The answer is more than we are aware of. In the past 2 years, the countries with political disinformation campaigns on social media doubled. I didn't have to search far to see where it manifests since the events were happening right in front of my eyes. In 2020 presidential elections in the USA, Facebook and Twitter vowed to tackle misinformation. Yet, when Trump went ahead and released a statement on both platforms, claiming premature victory and that the votes cannot be counted after the voting polls are closed, Facebook reacted too late. And by too late, I mean that by the time they added a warning label that the final results are not yet released, Trump's claim has reached over 100,000 reactions. In return, Trump supporters blindly followed the false statement and began to claim the elections as rigged by Joe Biden. This is one of the examples of how social media turned the tables from the state interfering with communication to social media interfering with the state. But the problem is that social media has little laws and regulations defined by our governments. That's why these digital bubbles that we live in can freely thrive and distort our political systems. During the past 2 decades, democracy was sleeping. Meanwhile, these organizations of data science took ownership of our social participation. We entered the 21st century democracy dilemma, the age of surveillance capitalism. Shoshana Zuboff defined surveillance capitalism as a new economic order that claims human experience as a free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. This new order is celebrated as personalization, the digital bubbles I kept mentioning over and over again. Yet, it ignores, overrides, and displaces everything about you and me that is personal: the democratic principles of individual rights, society interest, support for most vulnerable, and delivery of effective government services. We are trapped in technology that is turning away from the good for society, but at the same time, we can no longer live without it, nor should we. Now, do you feel anxious, scared, or skeptical? I hope you do, because I am too. This challenge that we are facing is part of complex systems that we all live in that are densely connected. Yet, we think that it ends at our governments or the CEOs of social media networks. One of the first questions that I raised to myself when I began to research about social technical problems was, have I ever been educated about digital literacy? I remember being taught how to create a charming LinkedIn profile, but not about what happens with my data online. Public servants who are striving to protect us with new policies are facing similar struggles, since there is a huge illiteracy in policymakers about technology, as well as policy illiteracy in computer scientists. How can we bring people together from different fields to secure a bright political, economic, and technological future for our society? Meanwhile, most of software developers are not concerned with ethical values, and working for Facebook is still considered as the ultimate career choice. I have to admit that I often felt overwhelmed, afraid, and anxious while exploring these topics. I saw it in others too when I was talking about surveillance capitalism and how social media interferes with politics. How can we bring understanding to this complex issue better when it's so hard to grasp? Perhaps we can use means of play to intervene with the societal issue. Playful interventions is a practice that does so, that breaks through invisible rules and uses play to question systems and open new perspectives. If we look at history, the fools and jokers at King's Court were already applying it to practice. Their task was to use humor and criticism to challenge societal conventions at the center of power. I see a pattern in us humans that we only take action when the consequences are knocking at our door. Just like we are right now dealing with the consequences of industrial revolution, the climate change, digital revolution has brought us surveillance capitalism. So let's tackle it together. Just like we co-created the internet, let's shift that power back to us, users and citizens.